going to do a video on Scott Galloway. I just saw the interview from the channel Diary of a CEO, and I think it's a great channel for interviews, and I like to see interviews because that's part of what I do. So it is a teacher and an entrepreneur, and he's talking on a lot of things that I agree with, and I'm going to mainly deconstruct a bit what he says, even if I agree in most of what he says. I think he's very intelligent, and but there are pitfalls to what he says, and I'm going to explain why through his astrology, because there is mainly in most of what he says, there is a common theme coming out of it, and I'm going to explain what it is. So let's dive in, and what I'm going to say also will apply to most self-help method, because this in lot of what we see on YouTube and self-help with either hypnosis or whatever the tools is used, we see some advice given, which I don't think will work for everyone, because here we don't all have the same problems, and he thinks everyone has the same problems as him, which is not the case at all. Maybe a lot of people will have similar problems than him, but it won't be exactly the same in most cases, and in some cases it will be totally opposite. So he gives good advice based on his experience, which is true for himself. If he can give himself that advice 30 years ago, that would be a very good advice for him. But for most people, it won't be as useful. And I'm going to explain that in details. So first off, I don't have his birth time, so I guessed it because in his interview he's going on the same thing over and over. So that gave me his K2 house, which is his past life, and his raw house, in which house Rahu falls. So that's why I made his birth time around noon time. There is a possibility that it's not the correct ascendant, because there is a 2 hours mark given here. I guessed the ascendant, so not exactly the hour, the precise birth time here. But I could be wrong. Maybe it's another house, and I think if it's another house, it's a social house, because it's very social, even if he has a lot of planets, including the moon, which is not well placed in Scorpio. So I I wouldn't see him being very social if with that placement, but he is, so not completely social either, but he's relying a lot on community and social and marketing, which is linked to the 11th house. And he's talking a lot about creativity, being a genius, and innovation, which is linked to the 5th house, which he struggle with a lot. So let's check a bit what he says in each part. First, he talks about his early years and how he struggled because his mother was getting sick, and he grew up in America, which for him is a very good place, and he profited a lot from that. And he has a good college education. He could go there, even if he has a very poor upbringing compared to his some of his peers, I would say. So he considers himself relatively lucky, but not very lucky either. And I think that's because he has Saturn on his ascendant, which made him made he have problem with his family and a lot of hardship in life, especially in the early years when Saturn is not mature. So that's why I think he doesn't have a relationship with his father, and his mother was getting sick, so he has a very tough upbringing. So here we have someone who has a very difficult childhood, I think. Yeah, I don't think he shared all of it. And that's mainly because he has moon and the sun in Scorpio, and usually that kind of people doesn't share much because they are emotionally closed, and his moon is combust with the sun, which doesn't help. So he has a very difficult moon, and the moon is the feminine sign, the ability to share, the ability to connect with others on an emotional level, which he has a hard time doing, and we can see through what he says that he had a hard time laughing and sharing and connecting with others. Not sharing, but connecting with others, which is one of the capacity of the moon. So early years, that's mainly what he talks about, I think, and especially that his mother was getting sick. Relationship with money, he talks about how he had to work a bit, start to work because he saw that life was hard, mainly because he has Saturn there, but also I think that's partly due to his Ketu being on the 11th house, which gives a bit of a pessimistic view on the world and opposite spirituality, because the 5th house is a very spiritual house, because it's a Dharma house. It's linked to who we are, what we do, how we enjoy ourselves, how we see our creativity, so our children and all that. The fact that he has a problem with, or not necessarily a problem, but he has a difficulty connecting with his child, I think. But I'm going to talk more on that later. So his mother getting sick, same thing. The importance of community. So here he's talking about his 11th house. So he's talking that community is important. We need to build a relationship with others, and he's talking a lot of that through marketing and business, and he's mainly seeing the ability to connect with others, but for a marketing side, for making business or building a partnership. And the 11th house is also the house of partnership and marriage. So here he's still talking about the 11th house, and is talking about that also a bit in an exaggerated way, I think, mostly because when we have Ketu on a house, we exaggerate that house and we rely mostly on that, and is almost exclusively saying that it's not his intelligence, it's not intelligence, it's not, it's mostly luck and community that helped him, according to him. And he doesn't see himself as intelligence, or he's mostly rejecting his intelligence, which I think he has some. He's not stupid, obviously. And the fact that he explains so much prove that he is also not just relying on just marketing, but he has some intelligence too. But he has a hard time saying that. So the importance of community, he also explained that when he was in college, his friends and peers helped him get back on his feet, give him advice on stop smoking too much weed and all that things. So he's relying a lot on community, and usually those who have 11th placement can be seen as a bit of problems in school, because they cannot be, they don't follow the genuine path of innovation. They have a hard time being themselves and being creative. And at school, it's mostly creativity that is asked. So someone with that placement can be seen as someone being lazy, smoking, or doing bad things with community, going out with friends, creating a gang, or being with peers a lot but too much and not going to work, or profiting from peers too much, or hanging out, going to parties, wanting to be a rock and roll celebrity, being a celebrity or something linked to being in rock and roll or something like that. I have seen a lot of that with that placement. So here, it doesn't explain all that, but I think there was a part of that at school. The importance of community, the decline of greed in young people. So the greed is talking about, I think it's mainly that Mars and Saturn being opposite each other in the almost exact same degree. It's 28 degrees here and also 28 degrees here, so it's exactly opposite. And when we have that, we have someone who can be a fighter, who lose his patience, who can have arguments that can lead in fights sometimes. Not all the times, but sometimes. And here we have also Mars being his Atma Karaka, his self planet, so he's using a lot of Mars energy. So someone who's someone who wants to do things. And that can lead to people being entrepreneur or something like that, because they want to do things. Can be a fighter, can be a martial artist or something, but it can lead to someone working a lot. So I think that's why talking about creating young people, and there is a decline in grades. Whether there is a decline or not, I'm not going to focus on that. I'm not sure there is a decline in grade. Maybe there is. I didn't check on that. The most important things, decision you will make. I don't remember what he said here. Dating apps. So he's still talking about community here, but dating apps for him are useless, or mostly useless, because they are favoring women more than men, and creating problems because there is not balance. And I mostly agree with him here. I'm not talking about that because it's the same thing as the importance of community. Here, I think, though, that the problem is a lack of innovation. When he's talking about dating apps, I think we today mostly due to America being the giants that they are not innovating enough with those dating apps. They're pretending they are good, but they are not really good, and it's creating problems through community. So I mostly agree with him what he says here. I think those apps are not good. How do we get young men laid? I agree with him, but I don't think that's a solution. And it can be a solution for some people, like it won't be for some. He's relying on community for getting laid, obviously, because that's where I came from. That's his past life is related to the 11th house. So when you want to have sex, you will go in a community. You will go maybe on social marketing, or in a group, real life, going to parties, or maybe a fraternity like he did that helped him a lot, going to groups, whatever the groups is, he will use that to his advantage because that's what he's good at. What I don't agree with is that it's not the advice you can give to everyone. Let's say, for example, he had Saturn there in the 11th house. That house would have been blocked by Saturn, and he would have a very difficult time going to groups to get help from them. So, or let's say his Rahu and Ketu would be opposite. Ketu here and Rahu there. He would have a very hard time reaching out for help from people. He would be very asocial. He is very social, but if that placement was opposite, he would have been very, very asocial. He wouldn't be an entrepreneur or doing marketing. So the important decision we'll make, dating apps, or to get young men laid, that's what I was talking about. Misogynistic content, I agree with him, and I think also he only sees a male side, mostly because his moon is eclipsed. So he's not talking too much about the woman side in this interview. He's mostly talking about his male side, which is the most healthy he has. Even if in Scorpio the sun is not the most powerful, it's in the 10th house. So his sun is quite strong, but his moon is very weak here. So misogynistic view is right, that in our society women are getting in power, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but the problems, I agree with him that the male are getting dumped and not getting jobs, and so there is an imbalance created. But I think he doesn't talk too much about the woman side because he doesn't understand it enough. Because his moon is very weak, either inside because it's close to debilitation, and it's combusted by the sun. So this is someone who will sacrifice his woman, but he won't care too much about woman because his feminine side is weak. So here he talks about young men getting laid. He doesn't talk about young men getting married or having a long relationship. But he does talk about partnership, which is his 11th house. But he doesn't talk about connecting with a woman. He doesn't talk about taking care of her. And that's why his moon is combust. So here he talks about misogynistic content. So he talks about protecting the man, but he doesn't talk about why there is misogynistic content. And he doesn't talk about the woman point of view. The pit of your arc, the pit of the arc of happiness first. So the arc of happiness for him was overcoming his problems with Saturn and his moon being combust. He has a very hard time laughing, being himself emotionally. So he has a very hard time showing emotion. And when you talk about happiness for him, it's just simple things of nature or being calm or being mature, I think. That's because his Saturn is on his ascendant, so it's blocking his spiritual side. Is a hard time seeing him as confident and spiritually connected to something greater than himself. So when he sees nature, he's seeing that Saturn side, someone who is linked with nature, but not necessarily spiritually like he would be if that Saturn won't be there, wouldn't have been there. So here it's hard to explain why we've and been short about it. So I'm going to stop here just for that because it's going to be too long if I explain too much that. So for him, the arch of happiness and the arch, pit of your arch. When he was talking about the pit of his arch, it's when his business side wasn't working, his marketing or his business wasn't working, because his business is also related to innovativeness, and he didn't do much of it, I think, or not enough. And that's why I think he didn't have as much success as I think he would have. And at some point in his life, he had, when he was 40, he had a child to take care of, which is a fifth house. He had a hard time doing that because he was mostly focused on business. He started to see his child as a part of himself, so he started to look into the fifth house, and he discovered something new about himself that he didn't see, because there is a blackness here, there is a cloud of black cloud that eludes him here. He doesn't see the fifth house, and he started to see it when he progressively get into his 42 years, because that's when we start to go into the raw side. So he started to take care of his child and started to understand that there is not just community and business, there is also creativity, which is his son being born, and he has to take care of him and spend time with him, which he has a very hard time doing, spending time with his child, because fifth house is related to having fun, having patience, doing something you like, and he has a very hard time doing that. So your biggest personal pit is linked to that also, and I used to be an asshole. So I used to be an asshole is Saturn, his first house can give that a bit. Moon combust, he doesn't care about women that much, doesn't take care about his feelings, who he is from Newman side. When I see his interview, he's mostly stoic, doesn't show much emotion, is almost like a computer. So he has a hard time connecting with his emotion, but also being the asshole who get angry at others because he sees himself as lazy or uninnovative, doesn't have innovation, imagination, doesn't have much passion in life. You don't see him as someone very joyful, for example, or getting his ideas or to improve life or something like that. He doesn't talk about that at all. He don't say that life is fun and we can have fun or something like that. It's very unhappy, someone could say. So I used to be an asshole, is linked to that, but also that Saturn, Mars being opposite and Mars being in the 7 makes someone aggressive with his partner. So someone who can be very argumentative or give insults to people, which he admits to have done. Are you still working on? Because I think he was talking about sports and doing a bit of exercise, having fun a bit, which is fifth house, having hobbies. So he has some hobbies, but it doesn't seem to be his focus. And for him, the only hobbies is getting rest while jogging or something, or doing some physical activity. So it's not really your hobbies, it's just getting some rest while going back to work. So he's mostly focusing on those house and not those house at all. Jupiter here helps him a bit, but Jupiter is not very strong in his chart because it's not well placed in the Taurus sign. But it's not totally weak either, so he does a bit of that, but not too much. Why is health so important? So health for him is so important because he has Saturn there, which helped him see that death is looming around, so he has a fear of death. He has seen both his parents dies, so he feared death, and that gave him importance to health. So he does a bit of working out and focus on his health a lot. What is the most important thing for a brand to understand? So here he talks about marketing. So that's his work. He's a marketing master. He works with communities and brands. So brand is marketing. It's what he does, what he used to do. And he's talking about Apple and those big brands who succeeded through their brand. But he's talking then, what he's talking about then, I don't agree fully, I agree partially, because he's starting to say at some point that Apple and some other company are innovating a lot. I think they touch upon the fifth house a bit, but not totally, not to the point that he's saying. Because at some point he says that Apple is innovating, and I don't think they are. For example, he says that Apple created a physical store, and those physical store is an innovation. I don't think they are an innovation. I think it's a way to market and to make their product more appealing to others, but it's not an innovation. It's maybe an innovation at marketing people, but it's not an innovation in itself. An innovation, it's a project that actually helped people. For example, let's say they really created an iPhone that actually helped people. It does help a bit, but compared to what we have today, it's not really an innovation. So those past 10 years, they didn't innovate at all for me. Maybe a small step, but so small that it's not even appearing on the radar. What can we see from an obvious side? What did they do more than the other besides marketing, making their product more beautiful? Which it is not an innovation. It's a marketing side. It's making the product more pretty, more beautiful, but it's not an innovation. So I completely disagree on the innovative side of Apple and Steve Jobs, because his fifth house has Jupiter that's starting to melt into a debilitated one. Even if he died, that chart is still important for Apple. And his moon is combust, which is linked to that Cancer sign, so that fifth house is not fine at all. And when he's talking about Steve Jobs, about being a bully or someone who is an asshole, it's not the same thing at all than him, even the opposite. Steve Jobs was an asshole because he wasn't going into the 11th house at all. He wasn't paying attention to communities. He was working on innovation and innovation alone. And the fact that he wasn't paying attention to the community wasn't actually helping the community. So both the 5th and the 11th are connected. And when one of the or the other is bad, both of them are actually getting hurt. He doesn't focus on the 5th enough, so the 11th is also getting hurt. Steve Jobs' chart is opposite. Even if the innovation is not completely there either, they did innovated a lot at first. When they created the first iPhone, that was a very good innovation. It was not necessarily useful, but it was still very good innovation. Wasn't very useful because it doesn't really help people in a good way, because it was oriented to help them. It was oriented to help him. So he was focusing on himself alone. And that's why Steve Jobs is an asshole, because he's a solitary guy. He's alone, working on the 5th house, so his hobbies, which was making I think he was an engineer, someone who worked on things, making computers. So he was very creative, but alone. And that sun on the ascendant make him a loner even more. And that moon combusts, making someone doesn't connect with others. So we have multiple things and make someone a loner here. Here we have a loner, but someone a loner in the communities. Here we have a loner who is alone. That's even more obvious. But it's still marketing. I'm not completely doing that chart either, so it's going to take too much time to explain everything. But let's get to the last things. So brands, how do we keep people innovating? I think he had a hard time answering that question. He didn't really answer it, and that's because he doesn't really understand innovation. He's not a passionate guy. He doesn't do innovation. He does marketing. Marketing is the opposite of innovation. So last question was what you would do what advice would he give himself if he was younger, could talk to himself or something like that. And that's mostly what I just said about being more careful of others, taking care of others, being there, being patient, and showing interest in others. So he shows interest by being social, but he doesn't really connect because he has a problem with being himself. And it's a problem being himself also with the first house, which is his incarnation. So he doesn't have confidence in himself because Saturn on the first house give a problem with confidence. And fifth house also, because fifth house is a part of who we are. It's how we express ourselves. It's being ingenuity, being intelligence. It's the intelligence. It's being clever, being smart, finding new ways of doing things. So he has problems with that. He has some problems with that, and that's what he would give himself advice on, which he is totally correct about that, and he's working on that. So he's improving himself. So that was the last question. I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to give a small conclusion. So this video on self-help works. Sometimes he's giving a lot of good advice, and he's a very mature guy because he has Saturn there on the ascendant, which gave him a lot of hardship in life. But he has a bit of a pessimistic view because he doesn't see the spiritual side of things. He has a hard time connecting with his child and spending time with him. And he has a very pessimistic view of life, and he thinks everyone has a fear of death. Not everyone has a fear of death. If you have Jupiter here on the ascendant and a well-placed 5th house or 9th house, if the 1st, 5th and 9th house are very well placed, you will have someone who doesn't fear life or fear of death. So his advice doesn't work for everyone. It works for only a part of the population. And even the interviewer at some point, when he said that he see himself as a fraud, he has a hard time with that. Even the interviewer told him that not everyone sees himself as a fraud. So here we have it. I'm going to stop there, and that will be it for the conclusion.